Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how to remove the front wheel knuckle on a Honda S2000. I'm removing the front wheel knuckle on this car in order to replace the front wheel bearing and hub, but you might also want to remove the front wheel knuckle to replace it in the event that it is bent. The first thing you want to do is jack up the car, get the front of the car on jack stands, and remove the front wheels. Next, use a 12mm socket to remove the bolt securing the brake line to the wheel knuckle. This should give you a little more freedom to move the brake caliper around later. Remove the two caliper guide pin bolts holding the caliper in place with a 12mm socket or wrench and a 19mm open end wrench. Place the 19mm wrench onto the slide pin and hold it in place while using the 12mm socket or wrench to loosen the bolts. Pull the caliper off and place it somewhere where it won't hang by the brake line. I used a zip tie to attach my caliper to the upper control arm. Remove the brake pads and set them aside. Continue by using a 17mm socket to remove the two bolts securing the caliper bracket to the wheel knuckle. Pull the caliper bracket off and set it aside. Now you should be able to remove the brake rotor. If you have screws securing the rotor to the hub, you will need to use a hand impact driver to remove them. Otherwise, you should be able to pull the rotor right off. Another thing attached to the wheel knuckle is the wheel speed or ABS sensor. Use a 10mm socket to remove the two bolts securing the wheel speed sensor to the wheel knuckle. It's not uncommon for the ABS sensor to be seized in place. If this happens to you, I recommend trying to break the ABS sensor free by tapping on the bottom of the sensor. In the worst case, you can remove the knuckle along with the ABS wiring harness, which has a disconnect in the engine bay. Anyway, I zip tied the ABS sensor wiring harness to the upper control arm to get it out of the way. The last thing connected to the wheel knuckle will be the ball joints and tie rod. Remove the cotter pin from the tie rod end and use a 19mm socket to remove the nuts securing the tie rod to the wheel knuckle. Then use a ball joint popping tool to pop the ball joint out of the wheel knuckle. Remove the cotter pin from the upper ball joint and then use a 17mm socket to remove the castle nut securing the upper ball joint to the wheel knuckle. I suggest being particularly gentle with the threads on these ball joints since it can be a real pain to thread the castle nut back on once they are messed up. Then use a ball joint popping tool to pop the ball joint out of the wheel knuckle. As you can see, popping the ball joint can be a little violent since the upper control arm bushings are clocked. Lastly, use a 17mm socket to remove the two bolts securing the lower ball joint to the wheel knuckle. You should now be able to remove the wheel knuckle from the car. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below for any DIY you'd like to see in the future. Stay tuned for my next video, which will cover replacement of the front wheel bearing and hub.